Hi, Gary. This has been, I feel like, a long time coming. We've had a couple conversations and we thought, oh, we should have hit record because we had such a great time visiting. But I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for being here today.
Nicole, thank you so much for having me. I felt the same way. Yes, I wish we could have captured those earlier conversations, but I'm sure today will be fun too.
I know it's going to be so good. Well, I loved reading the book. I thought it was engaging and it is conversational, just like you talk about this casual conversation about aging. There was an optimism to it. I felt like we were having a conversation. I honestly, it was enjoyable. I found myself laughing. I could picture where you were as you were sharing about the different experiences and learning and conversations you were having. So I bought the digital copy, but I'm going to need to go back and buy the hard copy 'cause I think it's one that I'll want to hang on to. So I'd love to learn more about you and why you wrote the book, Are We Old Yet? You know, it blends a lot of your personal experience, scientific research, sharing more about your life. So I'd love to hear from you. What inspired all of that?
Thank you, Nicole. I'm so glad you read the book. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And you will see here today, yes, it is written in a casual conversation, much like I speak. And there's a coffee cup on the cover because to me, every good conversation requires a cup of coffee. So you will see here today that I have my cup of coffee that I will have and will be sharing with you today. Let me start by telling you just a couple of things, you and your audience. Hello, audience. And again, thank you so much for having me. A couple of things that you may want to know about me is I am a baby boomer. I am part of that large demographic of those people born between 1946 and 1964. And I suspect that many of your audience are with me. We're part of that whole silver tsunami. I don't know if you knew, we have this nickname that they call us, the silver tsunami. And I think that's wonderful. And that we're having this journey together, this aging journey together. Second thing is I am semi-retired. I still consult with a digital marketing company in Troy, Michigan. Shout out to my friends at SSDM in Troy, a bunch of great people. Coincidentally, we have an expertise in marketing to seniors, so it's kind of in my wheelhouse. And you already mentioned, and yes, I wrote a book, Are We Old Yet? A casual conversation about aging. I know we're going to get into some of that as we go along. And the other thing is, like all of your audience, I have a caregiver story. It might be a little bit different than many, but I do have a caregiver story. So that's a little bit about me.
So good. I know we're going to dive into all of that with caregiving and our views on aging, what you've learned, what you've pulled from all the research. And you also have a lot of history with working with the area agencies on aging, different senior living organizations. I know we connected over that. So I know
Mhm.
that that's going to also be pulled out in the wisdom that you have to share with your caregiving journey. And you mentioned it looked a little bit different, but I feel that you've walked this personal road with your parents. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there's a quote by Rosalind Carter that I think is appropriate for this conversation. And that's she says that there are only four kinds of people in this world. There are those who have been caregivers, those who are now caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need care.
Mhm.
And I think that's so true for everyone. There's always going in the aging process there always going to be some level of care and it looks different for everybody. It looks different. And yes, I my caregiver journey is two-sided, my professional and personal. And professionally, you mentioned the Area Agency on Aging. Do you think your audience knows about the Area Agency? They need to. Do they know about it?
No, some might, but I'd love for you to tell us more.
Yes. So, Area Agency on Aging, you have to Google it. You have to find your local office. There are over 600 offices in the country, and you need to find your local one because they are a wonderful resource for care and caregiving. They provide training and information, they provide financial assistance, they provide transportation, respite care, nutritional services. Many of us have heard of Meals on Wheels. that is all administered through the area agency and also legal services. So yes, highly recommend it. And I spent some time in my career with them. Can't say enough about that agency for your audience and for us and anyone who has questions about care. Oh, the biggest thing I should mention, they've got a bank of educated people. You can just call the 800 number and ask them questions, get ideas and thoughts. What should I do? How do I do this? And I have to tell you, a wonderful resource, and shout out to all my friends at the area agency. Now, on a personal level, my caregiver journey with my parents, and I'll make reference to my parents. And I know that there are people listening who are providing care for parents, friends, family, and loved ones, and maybe professional caregivers. And I know a lot of them because, again, through the area agency, we were dealing and working with professional caregivers, and that's a whole different role. And I give every caregiver props because it's a huge task, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But so my role, my mom passed at the age of 80 from Parkinson's and dementia. And the last 3 years of her life were in a nursing home.
Mm.
And so, as a different kind of care, my dad was the primary caregiver. Yes, she was in a nursing home, but my dad was there 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. And he, without a doubt, I would have to label him as a caregiver because of the love and support and the things that he did. He was the one that was giving her the cup of water and putting the straw in her mouth. He was the one that was calling for people when they need. I mean, he was a
Yeah.
caregiver.
Yeah, I firmly believe that families that have loved ones in communities are caregivers and they identify in that way. So I
Mhm.
love that you acknowledge that. Thank you.
Yeah, and they should. And then, so my mom passed away at 80, and my dad lived another 13 years till the age of 95. Now, oh man, when people ask, have you ever known a perfect relationship? And the one that comes to mind right away is my mom and dad. After my mom passed away, my dad actually had moved into a senior living community across the parking lot from my mom's nursing home
Wow.
because I was watching what was going on with his life and driving not far, but far enough that it wasn't working out. He actually ended up in the hospital because, again, caregivers know that giving care is difficult.
Yeah.
And it was difficult for him. And he actually ended up in the hospital. And when he came out, I said, Dad, why don't we just move you across the parking lot? And so we did, and he was in independent living, and every day then instead of driving, he would walk across the parking lot to see my mom. So after my mom passed away, my dad stayed there, and they did a great job. But I sort of became, I'm one of three kids, and my sister and brother from across the country could help, but not as much as I could since I was living about an hour away. So I was the one that then helped with transportation with his doctors, went to the grocery store for him and basically visited with him as often as I could. At the same time, I was raising my kids. And again, caregivers, I know what that feels like. I know what that looks like, that sandwich generation, that sandwich time of your life. I lived it. One day, I walked into my dad's house with groceries, and I noticed quickly that he hadn't eaten his cookies.
Mm,
The food in the refrigerator was starting to spoil, and my dad had been losing weight.
mm,
So I knew that even in independent living where there's food available and people there and so it wasn't the right solution for him any longer.
mhm,
And so, as families sometimes do, my sister stepped up. And so, we actually moved my dad to Wisconsin and lived with my sister for a year. And my dad had started to age. He was 92 when we moved him. Oh my gosh, I'm being wordy, but I have to tell you a cute, funny, but it doesn't sound like funny story. When we moved my dad to Wisconsin, a level of dementia had set in,
mm,
and he had traveled with all the pictures of the family. And there's one family picture of us, all the three kids and my mom, he'd always keep next to him. And
mhm,
so some friends of my sister's came to visit, and he was introducing his family.
mm,
So he pointed at my brother and says, "This is my son, Don. He's in California. This is my son, Gary. He's my favorite son." I make that part up. And
ah,
then And then he pointed to my sister's picture and he said, "This is my daughter, Patty. She passed away." Now,
Mm,
my sister was sitting right next to him holding his hand.
wow.
And when my sister told me that, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but she was laughing when she told me. And then
Mhm.
since she was, I had to ask, I said, "Did he happen to mention how you left the world?" And
Mhm.
she said, "No," and she laughed again. And so we're going to talk more about my sister, I think. But
Yeah.
so yes. So my dad ended up staying there for a year and then ended up in a nursing home for the last two. So
Mhm.
long story short, thank you for letting me tell this because I
Yeah.
think it introduces something that's important for us as we age and caregivers. I watched my parents age. I watched how difficult it was for my mom. My dad, I'm going to suggest, aged well.
Yeah.
He aged to 93, and then his last 2 years were difficult. And it sort
Mhm.
of introduces a concept of what, I write about in the book called health span.
Yeah.
Health span is that period of life that we stay and remain in good health, free from chronic disease, where we feel good, we can live life and we are able to care for ourselves. That whole, we talk about ADLs and, activities of daily living. We can do them ourselves. We enjoy happy life. And so that health span attitude and discussion I write about in my book and how we achieve it and why it's so important, as you can imagine. And I relate that to basically aging well. So that's my long story about
It
caregiving, if you don't
does.
mind.
It does. It really shapes our view, I believe, and what I've noticed and in conversation or with myself, right? My grandma moved into our home, caring for her and, witnessing my parents that as caregivers, we're tied to our caregiving, but it also shapes then our view of ourself as we age. And so I think it really is closely related to that. And, you have a chapter that talks about like, who am I now? Right. And
Yes.
the shift in our identity. And I think our caregiving really does play a
Oh
role
my
in
God.
that. So it really
So
does.
much so. I tell a story in the book toward the end about our parent-child relationship
Hmm.
and how for so many years we looked to our parents to take care of us. And again, I was lucky. I was fortunate. My parents did a wonderful job parenting. And so for so many years that happens, and then something happens. Our identities are literally reversed.
Yeah.
And it came with me when I walked in with the groceries and my dad, I could see my
Mm.
dad couldn't care for himself any longer. Yes, I was helping and we were sort of co-mutual, taking care of each other, so to speak. But when I saw that he literally couldn't take in the nutrition as he had. And my dad loved to eat. So that was a big thing. And so, yes, caregiving and identity take a big role. I want to talk about there's two times in our life where that comes. It starts in the beginning when we become that, when that happened to me, my identity changed because I did have to take on a caregiver role. I changed. I had to say, yeah, I'm grocery, but now it's different. And you have to gain knowledge, you have to start giving time, and there's another element to that.
Yeah.
It's a big element. The element is what are you giving up in your
Yeah.
life?
Yeah.
And again, I had two kids at home at that time. They were in high school and all their activities and things like that. And I was able to manage it, I think, fairly well. But the caregivers listening out there can probably relate. You give up a lot when you become a caregiver, and again, to the degree.
Yeah.
So that is one time in your life where your identity definitely changes. Your identity is basically caregiving. Then
Right.
there's a second time that we don't talk about it as maybe, and that's at the end
Mhm.
when the caregiving stops.
Mhm.
And there's reasons for that. Most often the reasons are sad. And so we go through that. But then it's like, okay, now what?
Mhm.
Conversation in my book called 65-Year-Old Orphan. And when my dad passed away, he was in Wisconsin. And so it was an 8-hour drive there, and we spent time together, an 8-hour drive back. And on my drive back, I sort of came to the realization that at the age of 65, I'm now an orphan. Both of my parents are gone. And again, that's a different identity because, we have family identities. I was a son
Mhm.
and I'm a father and I'm a husband. But when your parents are gone, your identity changes again. And so how caregivers go through that is very important. We'll talk a little bit more about maybe ways to manage that and make it better. But
Mhm.
yeah, identity and caregiving go hand in hand for sure.
They do. Do you think we can be good caregivers if we haven't reconciled our own view on aging? I know that's a big question. Surprising you
Can
with
we
that one.
Wow. Okay, that's a trick. Can we be good caregivers if we haven't reconciled our own aging journey?
Mm,
Uh, I think, let me answer it this way.
yeah.
I think we can be a better caregiver if we understand where we are in our own aging journey and if we manage it. And I want to talk about how we can manage it because we do. If caregivers don't take care of themselves,
Mhm.
when my dad got sick and went in the hospital, he couldn't go visit my mom.
Yeah.
He got sick. He did too much. He didn't take care of himself.
Yeah.
And so for caregivers, oftentimes baby boomers absolutely need to understand our own aging journey. And with that, can be a better caregiver. With a
Yeah.
great question that I had. Yeah,
So
question.
good. That's so good. Well, we've talked about the book, we've mentioned it, we've talked about your story. But I want to discover more about the book and why you wrote it. And we're going to then dive into some of the components of that because I'm just excited for people to A, read it, but to learn from it. And I think your perspective is the perspective that a lot of us are in, right? We're not
Right.
physicians, we're not experts, but we're people that want to understand and learn and then know how do we do this well and how do we have that perspective shift. So,
Great.
yeah,
I probably should share with the audience, if you don't mind.
let's do
The
it.
name of the book is Are We Old Yet? A Casual Conversation about Aging. And I do think it's important to share with the group why I wrote the book. And there's really two life experiences that drove that. The one I've already mentioned,
Mhm.
watching my parents age and seeing how it can be done and how it can be done better. And then as I reached a certain age, I knew what I wanted to be able to do. And then I'm going to tell you about another experience about in my life, and it was at my 45-year high school class reunion. And I'll do the math to tell you how old I was because it's important to the story. I was 63 years old. So this is 8 years, but 6 years ago, by the way. So at that class reunion, there's a group of us that went to the Friday night homecoming football game. I love Friday night football, and back then, and this night was great as well until
Mhm.
um, at the end of the game, we were losing badly. At the end of the game, some of the students walked by, and one of them looked up at my group, pointed, and shouted out, "Look at all those old people. Look at all those old people." Well, my first reaction was to look around to see who they could be talking about, because certainly it wasn't me and my group. But
Right.
I, I did quickly realize that, in fact, it was me and my group. And it opened my eyes and made me question it for the first time and ask myself, am I old? Am I
Mm-hmm.
old? And it made me angry, not because of the kid, but maybe a little bit, but because I didn't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Getting old is easy. You live your day, you go to bed, you wake up the next day, you do it over again, and you do it enough times where at some point in time, some 16-year-old kid's going to look at you and say you're old, right? But I didn't know how to age well. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know how to do it well. And aging well requires three things. It requires knowledge, it requires commitment, and it requires effort. And
Mm-hmm.
so, understanding that, I spent the next 2 years basically doing research for the book. Thousands of articles and books and podcasts and conversations with everybody. I wanted to know how to age well. And so that's what I wrote in the book. There's scientific sections in the book talking about the 14 hallmarks of aging and our telomere shortening and our senescent cells growing and all those kind of things that quite frankly bored my wife to tears. She actually said, "Why don't you just make that part of the back of the book?" She said, "No, that's going to be so." But then I also talk about the social aspects of aging. What
Mhm.
happens to our identity? Purpose. I want to talk about purpose. We'll talk about purpose later and what that looks like as we age. And
Mhm.
so I talk about grumpy old men and am I a grumpy old man and why we become grumpy. And I talk about other things, how to age well. And so that's what I did. And that's the sort of why I wrote it.
Yeah.
And it's sort of where we are today. By the
Yeah.
way, can I also say this? I'm not an author, didn't go through a publisher. I published myself through the channels, but the book is selling very, very well. And
Mhm.
I've come to realize it's not me. It's because there's a very large audience who want to know, are we old yet? And it
Yeah.
actually became a bestseller in one of the category of aging. And so yeah, a lot of people want to know, are we old yet? And what does that look like? What does that mean? And bringing it all the way back to caregiving,
Mhm.
we as caregivers need to manage our own aging journey, and it's a very, very important part what caregiving is.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'd beg to differ. You are an author. And
I am.
I can see why it's doing so well. And I loved the conversation in the beginning where you really dive into like, well, what is old and how do we how do we know that, and just going through the different ages and all of that. And yeah, it was fun to be able to read through and discover that. You also talk about how, looking at all the components of that, you did decide to give up your precious chocolate milkshake every night. Oh, the choices we have to make, right?
Yeah, there's I said aging takes commitment, right? Aging well takes commitment, and I really am committed to it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
when I do speaking engagements, I ask them to ask me how old I am,
Hmm.
and because I have a new way of saying my age,
Hmm.
and so when they ask me how old I say my answer is I'm 31 years away from celebrating my 100th birthday.
Ah, love that.
Um, because I do. And again, if I can just project that optimism out,
Yeah.
with that kind of optimism, it's easier to live
Mm.
on a day-to-day basis. And again, it's better for that caregiving process as well. If I can keep tying it back to the caregiving, because I think
Yeah,
that
I love
that's
that you do
important.
that. Thank you. Yeah. When you talk about how your wife was like, the science, the biology, all of that, but that is a focus. And you share how understanding the science behind aging can help us approach it with more optimism and acceptance. So I'd love, tell us more about that.
That's another great question. And it's interesting that for many, many years, we as a society didn't know a lot about aging. We
Hmm.
just accepted it because it's inevitable, right? And
Yeah.
so as a result, we didn't do much about it. Aging and death is just something that happens. About 30 years ago, that changed. And I think it's because of a lot of rich people said, "Hey, I'm getting older and I want to find out." And there's a lot of investment in it. And
Hmm.
so there's been a lot of research in the last 30 years, and specifically between 2010 to 2013, they've come up with this hallmarks of aging. Originally, it was nine, and now it's up to 12 to 14, depending on how they get put together and so on and so forth. So understanding these hallmarks of aging, now the scientists and medical communities are coming up with ways to age better,
Yeah.
ways to age better. And it's interesting as a baseline, as the most important thing to age better. It's the same thing that I used to tell my kids when they were young. If you want to grow up to be big and strong, you
Hmm.
need to sleep well, you need to eat well, and you need to exercise.
Hmm.
And that literally that advice that I gave my kids, and we know all of our life, that's the advice we hear. And it's nothing simple. It is simple, nothing dramatic about it.
Hmm.
That is the building blocks from which we can start to age well. Now, there's a lot of other things in the mix that they've come up with, and even some drugs that are being looked at. I'll mention two, just because I'm on that journey. Um, Metformin, which is some people may recognize as a type 2 diabetes drug, is actually in a phase 3 study for aging. And rapamycin is another one. Now, I'm not going to recommend anybody go out there to take these drugs.
Yep.
However, those are two drugs that actually are looking at and longevity drugs and things like that. Now, well, by the way, there's just one more thing I have to mention about the research about what we've learned in the last 30 years about aging. This is important. It used to be that we just said genetics would tell us how long we're going to live. You know, if our parents lived a long time and our grandparents lived a long time, so will we. And if they didn't, unfortunately, we won't either. Well, the research has now come out that that is only partially true. Only partially true. As a matter of fact, the research suggests that it's only about 20 to 40% true. And what really makes a difference about your health as we age, chronic disease and aging is a bit of a genetics, your environment, but most importantly, lifestyle,
Hmm.
lifestyle choices. How we live our lives is really the single most important thing that we can do to increase our health span and live a long time and live healthy and happy.
Right, right. So happiness as we age, I know that that's part of one of the conversations that you share, and we know the data, right? We know that obviously that makes life more rich and full and all of that. But what is the impact specifically of that as we age?
Happiness as I talk and write is one of my favorite topics because,
Mhm.
again, to me, aging well has three components. To age well, I think we want to be healthy,
Mhm.
we want to be happy, and we want to live a long time. And
Mhm.
whenever I speak about that, the heads in the audience are shaking yes, yes, yes. They want to be. And so, and they are really, really combined happiness and health overlaps so much in our daily lives. And then those two then can drive our longevity. And again, by the way, I blog also on my website. I blog and I just posted a blog on about the connectivity between health and happiness and why that's so important. So, anyways, yes, there's a chapter in my book, Conversation 19, that talks about it's called the happy chapter.
Mhm.
And I talk about happiness has been around, the pursuit of happiness has been around forever. Aristotle said 2,000 years ago, more than anything, men and women seek happiness.
Mhm.
And that thought process from Aristotle's wisdom 2,000 years ago is still true today. And we get happiness advice all the time. In 1989, Bobby McFerrin wrote the song "Don't Worry, Be Happy," and I'm gonna mention these songs and they'll go through people's minds. And then in 1963, Jimmy Soul wrote the song "If you want to be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty one when your wife. If
Yeah.
my personal point of view, get an ugly woman to marry you." So again, 1963, I was 8 years old. I'm like, what? That doesn't sound right. And so good advice, but actually not the advice that would really make us happy. I
Mhm.
want to talk about advice from the scientist. Jonathan Rauch, author at Yale, wrote a book called The Happiness Curve. The Happiness Curve. And by the way, there's a lot of discussion about happiness for everybody, but especially now as we age. So the happiness curve looks like this. He suggests that happiness in our life is like a U-shaped curve, U-shaped curve. We start out up here in the upper left-hand corner, young and happy because we have no cares in the world. Of course, we did. And then our happiness starts to lower when we get into our 20s because we're faced with all those adulting things.
Yeah.
My kids are in that age now, and they're doing a good job. They're doing a great job. My son's in New York, he's in medical school, and my daughter's in Chicago, living her best life, working hard and enjoying life. But,
Mhm.
hey, you mean I have to pay for this? This costs
Right.
money? You're not, just the whole I've got to get up and go to work, every
Right.
day.
Yeah.
My my daughter's working 6 days a week now. And that's tough. And she's
Mhm.
working hard and doing great. Anyway, so then we get into midlife crisis mode and we're managing our life and so on and so forth. Then happiness, actually, the science behind this starts to increase as we age.
Mhm.
And again, the audience may be thinking, that's not exactly how my happiness looks. And that's absolutely true. And I understand that. But Professor Bryant, I'm going to quote Professor Christina Bryant, from the University of Melbourne who studies this. And she says this, and I am going to read this. What she says is, as we age, positivity tends to increase, life satisfaction increases, our cognitive abilities to deal with life improve. We have more complex thinking and a nuanced view of life. And I love that term, a nuanced view of life. Everything's not black and white. We have to look at it. And so the content is really the final thing is we gain wisdom, and
Mhm.
wisdom can make us happier. And
Mm.
I think that's wonderful. And I do want to talk about one other significant element in this health, happiness, longevity curve. And it's from
Mhm.
another book called The Good Life: Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study. Robert Waldinger, medical doctor, Harvard MD, smart guy. He wrote a book about this study. This study started in 1938. And he taught it's studying people going through life and their health and happiness and how that works. And here's his quote. He says, if I had to take all 84 years and boil it down into one principle for living, it would be this: good relationships keep us healthier and happier and lead to a longer life, period.
Mhm.
Good relationships. And again, in the context of caregiving, I would say, one of the strongest relationships I would suggest is that caregiving relationship. And as
Mhm.
difficult as it can be, it is still a relationship. And by the way, he goes on to talk about all relationships. And so, the other element in caregiving is it's hard sometimes to maintain other relationships
Mhm.
in your own family or friends. And I would suggest, based on that book, the best you can. It is important to maintain relationships in the caregiving experience.
Yeah. Oh, that's such great advice. And it's so true. We see how those relationships can be strained in a lot of different ways. So the focus on that. Yeah. When you
So true.
when
Yeah.
yeah, when you share about, aging well, I know a part of that discussion in your book is about the blue zones and, relationships and happiness, and that social component is also a part of that, but, looking at health and longevity, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts about what you learned, in researching about the blue zones.
Again, the blue zones, to go back just a minute, how do we age well? How do we
Mhm.
remain happy, healthy, and live a long time? There's a lot written about it, but probably the single best place to learn about it is to learn about the blue zones. And the blue zones, for those who don't know, are the 5 places in the world where people live to be an older age, and they have the most centenarians in the world. And it's
Mhm.
important to remind people that these people just don't live long. They live healthy and they live happy lives. Well, a number of years back, a gentleman by the name of Dan Buettner went, sponsored by the National Geographic, did a study. And he wanted to find out, why do these people live longer than everywhere else in the world? And he came up with 9 lifestyle. And that's the thing, 9 lifestyle things that, and he called them the power of nine. And these power of nine, he said, is why these people live a long time. And I'll
Mm.
quickly go through them. If anybody wants to learn more about this, there's books. Just Google Blue Zones. There's books. There's actually a Netflix series on it. But here's the power of nine. Number one, move naturally. Here we call it exercise, but they just call it part of their life. They move naturally. They walk everywhere, they garden, and they play with their grandchildren. Number two, and this one's big, and we may want to talk more about this one. Have a purpose in life. In Okinawa, they call it ikigai, which means a reason to rise in the morning. Ikigai.
Mhm.
And that's very important. And certainly caregivers have a significant purpose in life. And there
Mhm.
should be some other purposes, but being a caregiver is a significant purpose. Number
Yeah.
three, downshift, deal with stress. Number four, 80% rule. I don't like this one. It's an eating thing. Don't eat till you're full, eat till you're 80% full. Number five is nutrition. Yes, they favor a Mediterranean diet. And I'm trying to do that now. I've really kind of switched everything. I still eat chicken and some meat, some not a diehard, but what you put in your body is very important.
Mhm.
Number six, red wine after five. They drink limited, but they do drink red wine, specifically a one from the Kanawha grape. It's the most healthiest wine in the world. My wife is half Italian and she drinks that. She believes this
Yeah.
wholeheartedly. Number seven, belong, spirituality. They're not
Mm.
pushing any one religion, but what he found was most of these people have some level of spirituality.
Mhm.
Look for a higher being to help out, and it can really, really help. My sister is, I'll tell you, is the happiest person in the world, and she shouldn't be. Physically, in different things, she has situations. Her husband passed away from cancer. She was a caregiver for a while. She was a caregiver for but she is and she'll tell you. I ask her, what makes you happy? And she says, God, it's the whole
Mhm.
religion. And so and I knew that was coming. I knew exactly why. But so spirituality. Number eight, loved ones first. They're very multi-generational, very family given. There's a quote from Okinawa that this one centenarian says, playing with my great grandchildren is like jumping into heaven.
Mm.
And number nine, having the right tribe. The longest living people in the world are very social beings, and they have daily coffee with their friends. They see people at the different events, and so it's really, really well. By the way, where are these five areas? Icaria, Greece, Loma Linda, USA, Nicoya Peninsula, Costa Rica, Okinawa, Japan, and Sardinia, Italy. So that's
Mm.
where the five blue zones are, and that's sort of the really rapid fire story of the blue zones and how we can live a happy, healthy, and long life. And again, the better we can live in our life,
Mhm.
the better we can do in life, whatever it is we're doing. And certainly, certainly that includes caregiving.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating to hear. And when you were learning all of this, how did you see aging was different in different cultures? I know that there's, each environment, specifically US versus other cultures. What were your insights on that?
You know what? I did do some research on that, and we don't, we're not the best in the United States.
Mhm.
I love being, I'm glad
Yeah.
I live here, but our culture doesn't handle aging as well as they do in the Eastern cultures.
Hmm.
Eastern cultures have roots in Buddhism and Confucianism, and if
Hmm.
I'm saying that correctly, and what they think about and what they do is they actually really have high esteem for people who are aging.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a Japanese word I can't think of it. I think it's simsimini, which basically means wise sage. They
Hmm.
value the wisdom of the older people.
Hmm.
And as a result, the older people typically, until the end of their lives, are the head of the household. And
Hmm.
there's oftentimes multi-generational households as well. And as a result, they just handle aging much, much better. In China recently, they actually, in a few other countries as well, they put together laws that make it illegal to not take care of your older family members. And I'm not sure how they track that or anything else, but better yet, in Singapore, they recently instituted some laws that gave tax breaks. And I think this is something we should do. This would be great. Gave tax breaks if your parents live with you
Hmm.
or if they live close to you. When you think about it, in the United States, we get tax breaks for children.
Right.
Hey, that's a cost. And why not when your aging parents come and live with you? I think that would be a wonderful thing. So yeah, from a
Yeah.
societal standpoint, I think we are doing better than we were.
Hmm.
Ageism is a whole other thing we could
Right.
talk about, but probably won't. So we are as a society here in the West doing better. But if we really want to learn how to take care of our older adults, you really look to the Eastern cultures and sort of see how they're doing it. And I think there's a lot to learn from it. So
Absolutely. This has been so good. What advice do you have for people struggling with the idea of aging? It brings changes to our identity and place in the world.
Aging is a difficult task. I joke about the name of my book and say OLD. Some people think is like a four-letter word because they don't want to say it out loud and they don't want to be called that. But it's okay if we add an ER and then we're older, and older is okay. But even with that, I know people are going to struggle, and everybody's situation is different. So it's hard for me to maybe give a general advice, but let me try.
Yeah.
We're not alone. There's silver tsunamis around us, and there's a lot of us together who are going through this journey. But if I can remind people that, maintain relationships is so important. Find that purpose in your life, whether it's still in the caregiving journey, have another purpose, and we can have another purpose. Look for moments to embrace of just having fun and celebrating that. I mentioned spirituality, and not to drive that down anybody's throat, but I do think that spirituality can be a real big help in this time of our journey. And
Yeah.
then, if necessary, seek help from a friend, clergy, or professional services. So the main message is to absolutely take care of yourself. Yes,
Mm.
you have a thought and an obligation to be taking care of somebody else in a caregiver journey, but I cannot overemphasize to make sure you take care of yourself.
So important. Yeah. And I love that advice to reach out, right? Reach out. There are support systems available. And I know I've learned from people in my life in conversation that helps me have some aha moments or look at something a little bit differently and what a gift that is. So, yeah, so helpful with us listening that might be overwhelmed by all of this, whether for ourselves or someone that we love. What's the one message that you would like us to hear and hold on to as we move forward?
Another difficult question because we're all so different, but I tell you a story about my life and what it does for me and how I can get through difficult situations. And this is a memory from 19 years ago. And I will say this, one of the wonderful things about aging is the collection of memories.
Mm.
For me, it's kind of like building a good library. The good memories and the good books you sort of keep on the shelf right at eye level, and you go back to those time and time again. And the bad ones you sort of put to the side. Well, the story I'm going to tell you is one of those good ones. And it goes back 19 years where my wife and I would pack up the kids and take them to family camp up in Oscoda, Michigan. In Michigan, we have a map here. Here's our map. Oscoda, Michigan's right up here. It's a 3 hour drive. And the first time my kids were in a long journey, and the first time I heard the term, "Are we there yet?" And we got into Oscoda, Michigan. It was a great drive, but my son started complaining that his stomach was upset. And
Mm.
so, not one to push my luck, I pulled over in the Burger King parking lot, and yes, he jumped out and emptied the contents of his stomach. He was car sick. He was sick. We
Mm.
continued on to go to the campground because we needed a place to stay. And our cabin was a 10-minute walk from the car. And so I put Parker on my back and we walked to the cabin. And as we walked, I could feel his mood changed as he saw the lake and the woods and the families. And right before we got to the cabin, he shouted out, "Today is the first best day ever.
Wow.
Today is the first best day ever." And so for me now, I'm on my aging journey. I go to bed and I thank God for my family, my friends, and my health. And I wake up the next day and I remind myself of the words of that 6-year-old boy, "Today is the first best day ever." And sometimes I find it to be true.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the inspiration that helps me in my daily life.
Absolutely. And will help all of us, right? We'll be able to remember that. Where can we learn more? Where can we connect with you, buy the book, support all of the work that you're doing?
Well, first of all, Nicole, let me thank you so much for having me on your show. It's been fun, and I hope we can talk again. It doesn't have to be recorded. We can just talk.
Absolutely. I
Great
love it.
conversations. I do have a website, GarryCole.com. I spell my name a little differently. It's Garry Cole.com, COLE.com. And again, on my website, you can find where you can link and buy my book. I do blog, like I mentioned, twice a month. And it's messages, optimistic messages about growing older. And I do speaking engagements, which I'm happy to do. So thank you very much for, oh, my book is on Amazon, and you can find it. Oddly enough, because of the spelling of my name, it's kind of hard to find me. So just search the book. Are we old yet?
Yes, I encourage people to do that. So
Thank you, Nicole, and it's been a pleasure.
thank you so much.